we've got to talk about the absolutely wild and bizarre $110 million scandal around Louis Scarcella. Because Scarcella worked on the NYPD's Brooklyn North Homicide Squad during the 1980s and 90s, back when you had homicide rates surging due to the crack epidemic. And Scarcella, I mean, the guy was famous. He was out there solving murder cases that his colleagues, they couldn't even get close to figuring out. His nickname literally became The Closer. Before retiring back in 99, he led at least 175 cases and then helped close another 175. And when I say that he was famous, I mean nationally. With him even popping up on Dr. Phil, where he bragged about how he could get confessions out of suspects. But all of this, as it turns out, that for years, New York defense attorneys questioned his methods, claiming that he'd coach witnesses or sometimes just threaten them into making false confessions. And then in 2013, a witness came forward, with him saying that an NYPD officer had told them to pick a specific murder suspect out of a lineup for the 1990 robbery and fatal shooting of a rabbi, with it widely assumed that they were talking about Scarcella, or because he had conducted the lineup. And immediately, that was very significant, because the man the witness picked, David Ranta, was ultimately charged and convicted of the murder. But that witness, who was also just 13 years old at the time, they were the only one out of 5 others to identify Ranta as the murderer. And those other witnesses included a man who actually saw the face of the shooter and said Ranta was, quote, 100% not that person. So the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office are like, fuck, we gotta review this case. And everything immediately began to fall apart. Investigators found that Scarcella and his partner kept very few written records, and they also took Ranta's confessions under super sketchy circumstances. For the supposed confession, it was never recorded on tape. Instead, it was just transcribed by Scarcella, a fact that the judge overseeing the case even questioned, asking why a veteran of the force wouldn't take the suspect into an interview room and record the confession as is standard. And this, as Ranta himself also insisted that he had never actually confessed to anything. And while they're not admissible in court, even passing a lie detector test when he was asked if he shot the rabbi. But then beyond that, the investigation revealed that Scarcella and his partner had coached witnesses and convinced them to incriminate Ranta with some dirty tactics. And I mean, insane shit. Like letting 2 violent criminals out of jail to smoke crack and visit prostitutes in exchange for implicating Ranta. And as the investigation continued, one of those 2 literally admitted that he had made up the story to try and cut a deal for himself, plainly saying the police had framed Ranta. And that man's girlfriend, who also told police she witnessed Ranta plotting to cover up the murder, she also went back on her testimony, saying she made everything up because she also wanted her boyfriend to get a deal. And investigators even found evidence that showed that Scarcella had investigated another suspect who looked shockingly like Ranta. But Scarcella chose to not submit any paperwork about that. And so with all of this, after serving 20 years in prison for a crime that he did not commit, Ranta was finally released and returned to his family. Now Scarcella, for his part, denied any wrongdoing, telling the New York Times at that time, "I never framed anyone in my life." But that is not where this story ends. Because shortly after Ranta's murder conviction was overturned, the Brooklyn DA's office ordered a review of every single murder case Scarcella had been assigned to that ultimately resulted in a guilty verdict, which ended up being around 50 cases. And notably, that decision, coming after the Times did a deep dive into dozens of cases involving Scarcella, with them finding a series of very alarming patterns, like the fact that he relied on a specific sex worker who was addicted to crack as a witness in multiple murder trials, because apparently she just had a real knack for witnessing murders that Scarcella had been assigned to. In fact, Scarcella himself said she testified in at least 6 of his cases. And in all the cases the Times examined, they found that her accounts contradicted those of other witnesses or existing evidence. Hell, during one trial, she even admitted she had lied during a previous testimony. And in another instance, she claimed to have seen a murder from the keyhole of a crack den. But investigators found the den didn't even have a keyhole. And this on top of the Times investigation also finding that Scarcella had a history of delivering confessions, quote, from suspects who later said they had told him nothing. And all of that, on top of other questionable practices around witnesses and keeping proper interrogation notes, with many, many people pinning Scarcella as a rule breaker who played on his own terms. And I mean, fuck, that even includes Scarcella himself, who told Dr. Phil back in 2007, "Are there rules when it comes to homicide? No. No, there are none. I lie to them. I will use deception. The bad guys don't play by the rules when they kill ma and pop, shoot them in the head, ruin the lives of their family. I don't play by the rules." Now, of course, with this, when the Brooklyn DA launched its reviews in 2013, Scarcella once again denied having done anything wrong, telling the Times, "I couldn't sit with my family the past 30, 40 years if I had hurt an individual. I never fudged a lineup in my life. I never, ever took a false confession." But, according to the National Exonerations Registry, 17 people whose convictions were connected to Scarcella's work have since had those convictions overturned. And of those just 17, 14 so far have been paid out a total of $110 million in wrongful conviction settlements. Which means this single man, this single NYPD detective has not only ruined countless lives, but has cost taxpayers $110 million. And that's only so far. And again, we're talking about many of these people having served a decade or more in prison for crimes they didn't do. Right? Because some fucking guy just loved having the nickname The Closer. That $110 million number, that includes Ranta, with him actually being the first to receive a settlement, which totaled $8.4 million. There was also Vanessa Gathers, who got almost $4 million after serving a decade on manslaughter charges the prosecutors say she was coaxed to confess to. There was also Derek Hamilton, who got $6.6 million after serving 23 years in prison, with him also now helping lead the charge against Scarcella. And again, that's on top of many others who, by the way, day includes some who died in prison or shortly after being exonerated, as well as just some kid who was 14 years old when arrested. And regarding those other 3 who haven't gotten settlements, they've now also filed claims with the state of New York, because those 3 were convicted of burning a subway token clerk alive in 1995 when they were teenagers. Last year, they were actually cleared after prosecutors found that Scarcella and his partner forced them to confess to the crime, failed to disclose sketchy witness identifications, and ignored inconsistencies in evidence in the teens' confessions. And again, while the impact on these people's lives, that's the key thing here, that staggering $110 million number, which again is going to get bigger. You have the Times reporting that no other New York Police Department officer has ever come close to costing taxpayers as much. In fact, records show that Scarcella's cases alone, they make up about 15% of the roughly $500 million that New York City has spent on reverse convictions from 2014 to 2022. I mean, we're talking about a city with 36,000 police officers. And a spokesperson for the Brooklyn DA's office also saying cases linked to Scarcella compose nearly a third of the 36 cases the office has agreed to vacate. That's on top of a handful of others that have been reversed by judges. And the unfortunate truth about this is that all these payouts, they're a band-aid. They don't fix anything. They should still happen because these people were completely fucked over. But you have experts saying, hey, even if these settlements are historic, they don't actually do anything to prevent misconduct. With Vanessa Potkin, director of the Special Litigation for the Innocence Project, telling the Times, I actually think it's really problematic because although it helps bring a measure of justice to the wrongfully convicted person who has been harmed by the system, it doesn't do anything for accountability because the taxpayers are the one who are bearing the impact. And beyond that, right, the man of the hour, Scarcella, he hasn't had to bear any responsibility for his actions. Right? He hasn't had to admit any wrongdoing as a part of these confessions. And I mean, he still collects his fucking pension. So it's hard to have any hope that the situation will actually change. There's no deterrence or accountability for the monsters that are causing all these problems. The system is currently built to try to make up for the failures that they are responsible for way after the fact, after the damage has been done, rather than trying to stop it from ever happening. With all that said, that's where we are on this. And in the meantime, I'd love to know your thoughts on this situation in those comments down below.